I thank you, Rabbi, so much for the opportunity. And it says in the Talmud that words that leave the heart enter the heart. So I'm just going to speak from my heart, and God willing, we'll all experience something together. So I'm going to talk about a number of things this morning relating to Hollywood and writing for various TV shows and things like that, and how I got started. And then also my Jewish journey. I wasn't raised in an observantly Jewish family, a frum family, and so I sort of arrived at that, and we're going to mix them all together and just talk about life in general. So with your permission, it was shocking to me actually that I became a writer at all. I always thought that I was going to be a lawyer, and so I'm not quite sure how I ended up writing comedy for television shows out in Hollywood, believe me. But here's how it happened, actually, in a very sort of roundabout way. I actually was finishing up my freshman year at Harvard College, and I heard a couple of students talking with each other, also freshmen. And one says to the other, "What are you doing for your summer vacation?" And they were doing some sort of investment banking thing at some big fancy corporation. And the other person was going to Asia, and that seemed very sort of exotic and cool and everything like that. And I realized that I didn't have any summer plans, you know? And the stakes seemed sort of high, like what constituted a summer plan for these people anyway. And I called up my mom and I said, "Mom, what am I doing for my summer break?" And she said, "Well, I can talk to the superintendent of the building and you can maybe be the elevator man." And so I said, "Make the call, you know?" So she called me back a short while later and she said, "You got the job." And I said, "Well, that's fantastic." Now, there was something else going on at that period of my life, which is that I felt really bad for Harvard for having accepted me as a student, because I didn't get into other schools. They were really the only ones who accepted me. And I hadn't really been much of a student in high school at all. I didn't really read any of the books. So I thought to myself, as an act of penance, really, on the elevator, I'll try to read as many of the great books as I could, books that I imagine all my fellow students had read themselves. So I remember I started off with 100 Years of Solitude, and then I moved on to Crime and Punishment, and everything like this. And it was actually turned into like this fabulous experience. And there were moments where, as strange as it sounds, I'd literally have to put the book down because I was swooning over the beauty of sentences. And I experienced something akin to a calling that I really wanted to be a writer myself. And so strange as it sounds, this sort of detour, or this sort of part-time kind of, odd kind of job, running the elevator in my apartment building, turned into really the professional turning point in my life. And I liked it so much that I took the same job sophomore summer in college and junior year as well. And then when I graduated, I actually had no job prospects. I was writing at that point another sort of key piece in my personal history for the humor magazine called the Harvard Lampoon. And my resume was like, it said, Harvard Lampoon, an elevator man. And then the bottom 3/4 of the resume was blank white paper. And so I guess I shouldn't have been so shocked that no company really even wanted to interview me. Forget about offering me a job. I mean, companies that were coming to campus to hire people wouldn't meet with me. And so I thought to myself, maybe I should change elevator man. The building was run by a company called Kenton Associates. So I thought, how about this? Special intern for Kenton Associates, researching problems in urban transportation. I thought that might work. And then I thought, wow, one single question will puncture that entire illusion, They'll kick me right out of the office. It will be humiliating. So I decided not to go that route. So at that point, like I said, I was writing for the Harvard Lampoon, the humor magazine there, and I didn't know any, like many of you perhaps, I never even thought that when you watch television that there was actually a writer. It just seemed like everything flowed so seamlessly, that the actors just said what the actors said, that the whole idea that there was someone really writing the scripts was a fairly novel thought to me. And it seemed like a lot of fun. And like I said, I'd been reading all these books and discovering that, to my shock, that I had sort of a creative side. And so I thought, well, this would be a really fun way to make a living. Maybe I can try doing this. And I started with a partner writing some of the humorous pieces for the school magazine together. And I said to him, well, would you like to try to make a go of it out in Hollywood? See, maybe we can get a job. Just maybe that'll happen. So he said, yeah, I'd like to try to do that. And so we wrote some material. We found out from people who had been on the Lampoon who are now writing for a show. Now there are quite a number of Lampoon people who write for TV shows out in Hollywood. But at this point in sort of time, they were few and far between. It hadn't been like a big wave yet. I was toward the beginning of it, so it wasn't obvious that it was going to happen at all. And so these two friends said, well, they're looking for writers on this show that we're on. So we wrote some material for that show, handed it to them. And I'll just tell you one of the truths about Hollywood, which is that, especially from the writing standpoint, you put your heart and soul in writing a script and you try to make it as good as possible and everything like that. And you imagine that when you're finished writing it, that, certainly people are going to read it. But I can tell you that after you write it, it's probably even harder to get people to read the script than it was to write it. So that can be a very frustrating experience. And sometimes people never get a person to read their script. So our material for the show that we applied for actually just sat on the producer's desk for a couple of months, and I don't think they even looked at it. But after I graduated, and by the way, when people would ask me what I was doing for my summer breaks, I felt a little bit self-conscious saying that I was an elevator man. So I remember used to saying, well, yeah, traveling. So, they don't have to know everything, right? So, anyway, a couple months into, post-graduation, I guess I graduated in maybe May or June. In August, we got sort of the call, the big break, as they say, And how did it manifest itself? It was a 3-week trial period on this show on HBO, and that was it. So it was a very, very high pressure type thing. My partner and I flew out, and the first week didn't go really so well, and the second week went slightly better. So they gave us a second 3-week trial period. And then the second 3-week trial period went much, much better. So we had sort of proven ourselves. And so then they awarded us with a 4-week contract. So that was my introduction to job security Hollywood style, And I'll tell you something about writing. Before we started our first 3-week trial period, we went in a couple of days early, and they gave us a tour of the office. We met the writers and everything like that, just not too many, maybe about 10 writers. And several of those were in teams. And when we showed up that first Monday, 2 of the writers were gone. And you don't have to be a PhD in math to make the calculus. It's like 2 new guys coming in, 2 guys not there. Aha, I see what happened. And in their office, the 2 guys who were no longer there, I still remember they had their Polaroid snapshots of their children on their wall still. And that was a very sobering sight because it communicated to me that they really didn't care. You either you produce or you're out, and there's no sentimentality about it at all. And it always reminds me of an old joke that my dad told me growing up, which was about a yeshiva boy who was kicked out of every single yeshiva. and they ran out of yeshivas to send him to, so they sent him to a Catholic parochial school. And he got his first report card back, and he got straight A's. And they asked him, what's going on? And he said, well, I'll tell you the truth. The first day I walked into the school, I saw that they had nailed one of the boys to the wall. And I realized these people mean business. And so I realized that, you have to produce or you're out. It's as simple as that. And I remember my first assignment, which was, I guess we were there on a Monday. It said, by 5 p.m., or maybe it was 3 p.m. on Wednesday, give us a number of pieces set in an ice skating rink. And I thought to myself, wow, I have to be funny on paper by Wednesday at 3 in an ice skating rink. And I thought, well, that's what it means to write comedy professionally. In other words, if you think, oh, when I'm in a funny mood, I'll write something funny, not the job for you. There's a craft element to it, which is kind of surprising because it just seems like, well, it's all creativity and everything like that. But there's a work element to it, which was surprising to me, and it might be surprising to you to hear that, a lot of times, like writing a script, you do need a certain level of inspiration, certainly, but there are all these different elements that must come together, in which case it's not that different from carpentry or making a cabinet or a table or something like that. So it's interesting in that way, just how it's a combination of different disciplines. Now I want to switch tracks for a moment and switch to sort of the Jewish journey for a moment, because while all this was going on in my life, and things were starting to go well, I was going from job to job and things like this, there was something that was welling up inside of me, and it was welling up inside of me from really the time that I was a kid. I was trying to remember my first conscious memory of God, and I remember when I was 6 years old, someone told me that when you burp, you're supposed to say, "Excuse me." And I grew up in like I say, one of these large New York buildings, and so there I was, 6 years old, sitting in this giant pink kitchen at nighttime by myself, and I burped. And I thought to myself, well, am I supposed to say, "Excuse me, no one's here"? Right? Like I had, at 6, this sort of etiquette quandary, And then I remember thinking, well, God's here, so I said, "Excuse me." So I guess from a fairly early time, I had a sort of a knowledge that God is a reality. It's not some sort of abstract thought. I heard a rabbi say one time, he was saying, what's the difference between a monotheist and a polytheist, right? Someone who believes in one God or many gods. So someone who believes in many gods says, well, God is in the trees, and God is in the ocean, and God is in the mountains. Someone who believes in one God understands that the entire world is inside God, and that God saturates all of reality. See, many people think that it's sort of like, I'll name different things in the world. There's chairs, and there's pencils. There's football, and there's concrete. There's God, and there's chocolate. And it's like, well, wait a second, back up a second. What did you say? Did you say God? God is not one thing on a list of things that exists. The entire world exists within God. So I'll share with you something a little bit crazy, but hopefully it will help to make this point. I once imagined a conversation between two fish. Do you think I'm mad yet? Or you decided that I was long ago? And one fish says to the other, "Do you believe in water?" And the other fish says, I don't know if I believe in water. My grandfather was very religious. He believed in water. So what's the joke? There's nothing but water. Water is the only thing that exists. It's the only thing that's going on. And that's us and God. The only thing that exists is God. It's literally the only thing that exists. I was having lunch with a friend of mine. I said to him, "Where did you park your car?" He said, "Across the street." I said, "Do you realize you can't walk to your car without swimming through godliness?" See, that's what it is. This is what it is. God's not just a concept. It's not an idea. It's the reality of the world itself. You see, the whole concept, this whole word religion, we actually don't believe in religion. Religion sounds like some kind of bonus extra credit idea. I'll live my life, and then there's this idea called religion. Hopefully, I'll be a good person, and that will be quote-unquote religious. But that's not it. We say that there's a truth to the universe. There's a truth to the construction of reality itself. And that's the Torah. The Torah is the blueprint of that. And it's the guidebook for us to be successful in terms of realizing that. So I'll get back to my life for a moment. So I'm 8 years old, and my brother, who was older than me, we had one religious neighbor in this, fairly massive building. And as a bar mitzvah present, she gave to my brother a subscription to the Lubavitcher children's magazine called Talks and Tales, which was, at that point anyway, a very sort of low-tech, very kind of modest little pamphlet that would come periodically. But in each one of those little Talks and Tales, they had a Hasidic story. And I remember as an 8-year-old reading these Hasidic stories, and this became the foundation of my whole understanding of God. And I'll tell you, and I say this, what I'm about to say is coming from a pure love of Hasidic stories, by the way, but they're all the same. They're all different, but they're all the same. And by that I mean they all have three fundamental points. One, there's a God. Two, God is good. Three, God is intimately involved in every detail of your life. So that was very grounding and very reassuring. Across the street from my house, there was a rabbi. I was going to a Reform congregation at the time, but the neighborhood now is actually a pretty religious Mecca, the Upper West Side of Manhattan. But at that point, it wasn't at all. The number of Orthodox from congregations were scattered, few and far between, really. But outside my kitchen window, I could see a little tiny shul. And the rabbi there was someone named Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach. And I didn't know that he was a world-famous rabbi. He was just the rabbi of the little shul across the street. And so I started going there when I was 14 years old. And I heard him say these Hasidic stories, and it spoke to me so much, and it created this amazing bond. And I remember when I was 15 years old, I was dancing with the Torah and Simchas Torah, and I remember thinking while I was holding the Torah that this is my whole life, this is all that I want. But I wasn't kosher. I didn't keep Shabbos. I didn't know any of these things, really. A little bit, but I wasn't part of that community. I didn't have that background. But it was so strong inside me, I did learn one thing that I tried to be very observant about, and maybe if you'll humor me, we'll do this together. We'll do a little back and forth. I'll tell you something, and then you'll yell it back. We'll just make a game out of it for the next few seconds. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's actually, believe it or not, a Torah way to put on your socks and shoes. So someone told me that, and I'll get to the keeping Shabbos part soon, but until I started keeping Shabbos, like I said, I wasn't doing too much, but I was definitely putting my socks and shoes on in a very religious way. So I'm going to tell you how to do it, just in case there's someone here who doesn't know how, okay? First, you put your right sock on, then your left sock, then your right shoe, then your left shoe, then it reverses. You tie your left shoe, you tie your right shoe. Okay, so with your permission, let's do it together. You ready? Yell it out. Right sock! Left sock! Right shoe! Left shoe! Then you tie your right shoe. Okay, well done. So this thing sort of saved my life, you know? Because I don't know what I was doing, but every time I was putting on my socks and shoes, I was definitely communing with God. And I'll tell you something, that's the beauty of Torah. Like I say, many of you know there's a blessing that we say actually after we go to the bathroom, just thanking God that our bodies are working, that we even have a body at all. Actually, we have different holes in our body, like our mouths, our ears, our nostril. It's quite interesting. The rabbis have commented that our soul doesn't just fly out of our bodies. The fact that you have this material construct, your body, and this spiritual construct, your soul, coexisting when really it's not obvious that they ought to, that's this ongoing wonder. And so that's one of the things after we go to the bathroom, we just thank God that this harmony, this balance between body and soul is still going on. So a lot of people hear about these things, socks and shoes, blessings after going to the bathroom, all sorts of niggly type stuff, it seems. And they ask a very interesting question. Are the rabbis control freaks? Where are they getting all this stuff from? And yet, when you understand this point that I'm about to tell you, you'll make a breakthrough in consciousness in your understanding about Torah, which is the idea like this. If we exist within God, if we're swimming literally within God at every moment, there is no such thing as a secular moment. That means that even the most mundane aspects of our life, the most mundane, going to the bathroom, putting your socks and shoes on, there must be a way to make that holy. There has to be a way. And then when you understand that, there has to be a way to make everything holy. From the moment that you're born to 120, from the moment that you get out of bed to the moment that you go to sleep. It has to be. And so when you find out about all sorts of halacha and mitzvahs and religious law and all the rest, it's to address consciously, intentionally, every aspect of what it means to be a human being, because there's no moment that you can't elevate and sanctify the moment. That's the idea. That's the idea. So like I say, let's go back to the Hollywood track now. Everything was starting to go right. I was having, believe me, a fantastic time. I was having a wonderful time, going to parties, doing this, that, and the other thing. Lots of friends, lots of business success. My family, I loved, everything. And I wanted to say thank you back to God. But also, all of these moments in my life that I described from the religious side were also welling up inside of me. So I was wondering, how can I say thank you back to God? And I was once walking down the street, and I was watching the sun set on a Friday night. And I thought, wow, when the sun sets on a Friday night, that's like God saying good Shabbos to the world. And I thought, how can I say good Shabbos back to God? Maybe if I keep Shabbos, that will be my way of saying good Shabbos back to God. And so like I said, I wanted to say thank you for all the blessings. But let's go a little bit deeper too. I heard this wonderful teaching, and I heard it in the name of, I was told, one of the Hasidic masters. Later I found out that it was said by a biker in drug rehab who had tattoos up and down his arms. But when you hear the teaching, I think maybe it's a better teaching coming from him, honestly. And here it is, that each one of us is created with a God-shaped hole inside of us. Each one of us is created with a God-shaped hole inside of us. And all of us, at different times in our life, perhaps throughout our life, we sense that there's something missing. And a lot of us try to fill that void up. We do it with sex, with drugs, with money, with career, with socializing, with shopping, with all sorts of things. But we find that nothing actually fills that hole except God, which makes sense because it's a God-shaped hole. Think about it. Did you ever do a jigsaw puzzle and you're missing one piece, and you can't jam the wrong piece and expect it to fill the spot? You need the right piece in the right spot. Then it fills it. It's like, if you think about it, it's like a USB port God builds it in so that we can connect to him. We sense this desire, this longing for closeness. God builds it into us intentionally. So if you feel this existential longing inside of you, don't ask yourself what's wrong with you. It's what's right with you. Because we're supposed to experience that. It's by design, literally. So at this point in my life, I was 24 years old, and I got another big opportunity to move from one side of the writing community to another side, into what they call sitcom or half-hour comedy. And it was for a show called Women in Prison. And if that doesn't sound funny to you, America agreed. There were actually 99 shows on the air at that point in prime time, and it was ranked, I kid you not, 99th. So this was our first half-hour opportunity, and my partner and I got the job. Now, I had been keeping Shabbos for about 2 months at this point, which there was no conflict with work as I was unemployed at the time. And so we got this opportunity, and it was like, all right, well, I had never kept Shabbos and had a job before, so I didn't know what to do, so I didn't mention anything to the bosses. And, early on, as we're launching the show, there wasn't that much to do. Friday ended at a normal time, went home, all was good. The second Friday, though, was a little more complicated. I was in a conference room, and it was one of these meetings that seems like it's about to end. And I'm sure you've all been in them, and then someone says, oh, one more thing. And you don't know whether that's going to be another minute or another 30 minutes, right? And then someone else after that can go one more thing. You don't know. So it was real unclear to me. And the reason why that was an issue was because I was sitting in front of a big picture window in the office. Like I say, it was about to be Shabbos. You can imagine palm trees. The sun was setting literally in front of my face. I lived close to the office, so it wasn't that far, but it was clear that I was going to have to make a move pretty soon, but I hadn't mentioned anything about Shabbos to my bosses at all. And what do you say in a room full of strangers, about something that's, a little bit personal? Hey, guys, you know how God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh? Well, funny thing. So, honestly, I had no words, but I realized if I didn't leave now, I was going to blow it, so I just stood up and left the room. And in retrospect, I think everyone thought I was going to the bathroom, but I never came back. And I remember running to my car, and I always think in my mind of a story that I heard from Rabbi Mordechai Becher. He's a big rabbi. He travels around the world giving speeches and programs, and he tells a story about how they put him up in Hong Kong on something like the 80th floor of this massive building on Shabbos, and he wasn't using the elevators for whatever reason, and so he had to walk. So he's walking up. He's about 75 flights up, and this Asian worker looks at him, and he feels as though he has to explain his behavior, and he says, "It's my day of rest." So I was thinking, as I'm running to my car, for a day of rest, this is causing me a lot of anxiety, So I got back to my house, and the next week, right off, I realized I have to talk to my bosses because I can't go through this every week. It'll kill me. And, I sat with the executive producers. There were 2 executive producers. It was their first show, so they, very understandably really wanted it to go well. And I remember saying, I think these were the exact words I said to them. I said, would it be okay if I left a few hours early on Friday so that I can observe the Sabbath? And they looked at me and they said, no. No. And had we known that you wanted to do this, we never would have hired you. And now that you're telling us that you want to do this, you have to make a decision, because if you say you want to do this, we can't, and they didn't finish the sentence. But it was very clear that I no longer had a spot on the show, that I was fired, quite simply. They said, think about it. I didn't have to think about it, but I didn't want to be confrontational with them. I told them I would think about it. I went back to my house. I called my agent. He said, what are you going to do? I said, what do you mean, what am I going to do? I'm not going to work. He said, well, if you don't work, then you'll never work again in television. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with like old Hollywood movies, but you know how in many of them they say, you'll never work in this town again? So I was like, wow, people actually say that, and someone's saying it to me. So, it was an interesting moment. So he said, so what are you going to do? I said, I'll write movies. He says, you don't just write movies. And it's true. You've got comedy, you've got drama, you've got television, you've got movies, you've got game shows, reality shows. And a lot of people think, well, if you're a writer, certainly you write for all of them, but each one is a separate field for whatever reason. And if you want to move from one segment to another, you have to start from the bottom for the most part and prove yourself again, and there's no guarantee that you can switch at all. So the next day, I went into my office, and I had a real problem because of my partner. He wouldn't have gotten the job that we had right now because we had co-written the script that we were hired on. On the other hand, he was about to be fired because of me. And it seemed completely wrong that because I want to keep Shabbos, and he, a fantastic, wonderful person, not Jewish, but that because I want to keep Shabbos, he loses his job? That seemed absolutely off. I said to him, I remember saying a few things to him. One thing I said was that there was more to life than chasing a dollar. And the other thing that I said to him was that if you want to try to stay on the show without me, and it wasn't clear that they were going to allow that because we were hired as a unit. I said, if you want to try to stay on the show without me, I totally understand. Now remember, we had done all of our professional work together, 100% of it, and even pre-professional work together. And I said, if they don't let you stay on the show without me, I won't hold it against you. I'll still write with you. And if you try to stay on the show without me and you end up staying on the show without me, if you ever want to write again down the line together, I'll never hold this against you. And he said to me, I think I would like to try to stay on the show without you. And I was like, what? You give a speech like that, you expect the person to say, wherever you go, I will follow. Nothing doing, But the truth is that I understood his point of view really 1,000%. I was really, really completely sympathetic. And he said to me something very true. He said, I would have wondered, if I didn't try to stay on, I would have wondered always what would have happened to my career. So it makes a lot of sense. So at this point, I was being told that I was about to lose my job, that I'd never work in television again, and I was about to lose my partner that I had done all of my professional work with. So you might imagine that I was freaking out. And the truth is that I wasn't. I was nervous because I'm a human being, after all, but I wasn't freaking out. And the reason is because I knew deep in my heart that nothing bad was going to happen from keeping Shabbos. I might even have to change my profession, But nothing bad was going to happen from keeping Shabbos. I knew that. I knew that. And my agents came in and they talked to the principals at the company. And they said, we like David. We want to keep him. And so they gave me a slightly lower salary and a slightly lower title, although I had come in at a slightly inflated salary and a slightly inflated title. And so it kind of balanced out. And so there it was. And I told you that this was the 99th rated show, and it was on the bottom network. Really a few weeks later, maybe a few months later, I guess, the show was canceled. And the two of us were hired on the #1 network on a top 10 show. And, we have this concept that all of our reward for our mitzvahs are actually stored up for us in the next world. And there's different explanations of why that's the case. The one that actually makes the most sense to me is that the next world is really, it's like quantum. If you think of like quantum physics, it's like a different, higher dimension of energy. And that the reward for serving God is so great that actually the reward for a mitzvah literally doesn't fit into this world. It literally doesn't fit into this world. So it's saved up for us. There are exceptions. There are certain mitzvot that we actually do get reward during this lifetime. The Rambam says something interesting. The reason why I'm telling you this is because I don't think that moving from the bottom show to a top show was actually a reward. But the Rambam explains it this way. He says that, it's like an IPO, like a brand new company. That if God sees that a person is really trying and everything like that, then God says, okay, you know what, I'll invest more in that person. I'll give them more resources. And with those resources, if they want to do good things, then maybe they'll be able to do more good things with more resources. So that's how I understand it. But I want to tell you something maybe more personal, more for me, more touching, which is I was fortunate enough to win an Emmy Award for my work on The Simpsons and a Golden Globe Award for my work on Third Rock from the Sun. But this story that I just told you about keeping Shabbos is really the proudest moment of my life. And the reason is because I don't know how to put it into terms exactly, but when the sages talk about the ideal goal of a human being, they describe it this way. They say that a person's inside should match their outside. In other words, that the purity of their soul should be reflected in the work of their hands, in their actual actions. And just to kind of give you a visualization of this, maybe to make it a little bit more real, I don't know if you can remember back to maybe your high school days or something like that, but there's always an image that comes back to me, which was looking through a microscope. And I don't know if you can remember this experience where you're trying to bring something into focus, and it's blurry, and you keep turning, and you go, there's something deeply satisfying when it's in focus. And then sometimes you turn it one more rotation, and you go, now it's really in focus. And there's this amazing sense of clarity that you just see unfold before your eyes. And I felt like, at least for one moment in my life, all of us have our ups and downs, myself included, and better moments, worse moments. But I felt like at that moment when I took this longing that had been inside of me for really my whole life, and I was able to reflect it outwardly in a way that was meaningful, that focus had somehow transpired. I want to ask you all a question. And this is a question I'm sure you've all wondered about, whether you've articulated it or not. Have you ever wondered if there's a God, and if God is good, why the world is so messed up? I think all of us have this question, right? Why is the world so broken? And it's a question that all of us need a very, very, very strong answer to. And you know something? I learned from a medrash an answer that's so strong and for me so clear and so compelling that it actually not only answers this most fundamental question of why the world is so messed up, but simultaneously it spells out in the clearest of terms what the Jewish vision and the Jewish mission is for all of us. And I'll even take it one step further. I think without the teaching that I'm about to share with you, you literally can't understand your own lives or the world that you live in. So what's the teaching? The teaching is as follows. The world is not finished being created. The world's not done yet. You see, the mistake that all of us make is we think that God, who's perfect, made this world, which isn't perfect, which means there's something wrong. Probably something wrong with God, because if God really is perfect, he would have made a perfect world. So what's going on? And the answer is the world's not done yet, and that's why we're here. We're here to be partners with God in terms of finishing the world. That's why we're here. Imagine how an architect works. An architect first envisions the completed building and then goes about to set it, to create it. The same thing with God. God initially envisioned a world without war, without hatred, without hunger. And now he's set about to build that world, and that's what we're doing here. And the tools that we do it with are the Torah mitzvahs. These are our tools. And we're partners with God in terms of finishing it all up. The most unbelievable partnership. How privileged are we that God chose us to be his partners? Let me put it a couple of different ways, just so we're communicating. Can you imagine walking into a kitchen and someone's making brownies? There's a bowl with brownie mix and there's a cracked raw egg on top. And you walk in and you stick your finger in the raw egg and the brownie mix and you taste it and you go, these brownies are terrible. The person says to you, they're not done yet. It's not done yet. Put it to a different way. Imagine walking. Have any of you been to a bad party? I think we've all had the experience of going to a bad party. It usually goes like this. You walk into the door and you go, I'm at a bad party. The thing about a bad party is you know literally as soon as you walk in that you're at a bad party. There's no one there. It's horrible. It's instantly awkward, right? And your first thought is just, how fast can I leave without insulting the host, right? So a lot of us are born into this world and people go, just my luck. I'm at a bad party. But do you understand? No. You are at a bad party. But you're here to make it into a good party. That's why you're here. That's the whole point. We're here to turn it into a good party. So I want to share with you something. I was listening to the radio, and they gave this news report about the monarch butterfly. And I don't know if you're familiar with the monarch butterfly, but there's something about it that has baffled scientists for decades. They literally can't figure it out. And they've tried every single angle. To this day, they have not been able to figure out this riddle. Okay, so what's the riddle? The monarch butterfly every year starts off in Mexico and it travels to Canada. That's it. So you hear that, you think, well, that doesn't really sound so astonishing. But let's go in a little bit more detail. The monarch butterfly actually has a pretty short lifespan, which means that the monarch butterfly that starts in Mexico every year and travels to Canada has never been to Canada before doesn't know where Canada is, and certainly doesn't know that it's supposed to go to Canada. And as it travels along the road, it has children, and it dies. And these children, if the parents didn't know where Canada was and that they were supposed to go to Canada, certainly the children have no idea where Canada is or that they're supposed to get to Canada. But it's actually even more involved than that, because the children have children and then they die. So now you have the grandchildren who are born along the road, and again, don't know that they're going to Canada or where it is. And it's their children who make it to Canada every single year. And then the whole cycle is repeated later on, where a brand new crop, who are now in Canada, make their way back to Mexico. They can't figure it out. They can't figure it out. And so when I heard that, I said, wow, that's the story of the Jewish people. You know, the Talmud teaches that all of us, when we're inside of our mother's womb, are taught the entire Torah. And then we're born, an angel touches us on our lips, and we forget it. But inside, through the Torah, God has implanted within us the most phenomenal GPS system. And all of us are traveling back to Israel. Throughout Jewish history, we've been born along the road, a lot of us not even knowing who we are, where we're going, or whatever it is. But inside, we know we're going back to Israel. We're all going back. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches that wherever a Jew walks, he's walking toward Israel, even if he's walking in the opposite direction. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what we've seen with our own eyes, more or less in our own lifetimes? The restoration of the state of Israel. There are now more Jews in Israel than any place in the entire world. It's unbelievable. It's happening in front of our eyes. And in the most amazing way, it's happening here, in this clear, revealed way in South Africa. These amazing Torah conventions, this amazing sharing of Shabbos that's going on, with all of you coming back all together, your inner GPS directing you toward this room, to this convention center, to Shabbos tables. Unbelievable things are happening before our eyes. We're witnessing the realization of God's vision for this world, a world of perfection, a world of peace, a world without war, without hunger, without hatred. And all of us are coming together, and we're all a part of it. Hashem should continue to bless us, to open up our eyes to His oneness, to realize wherever we go, we're swimming through godliness, and to be a conduit of that godliness for each other, so that all of us can taste the sweetness of Hashem. Thank you so much.